Nobody in the 1970s was asking if their kids felt emotionally safe. They were asking if they were fed, quiet, and out of trouble. And if the answer was yes, that was good parenting. Full stop. You know this because you were that kid, the one who figured out fast that big emotions were inconvenient. That needing reassurance was annoying. That the fastest way to get through the day was to handle your own feelings alone and show up at the dinner table like everything was fine. And you got so good at it that you're still doing it now, at 40, 50 years old, automatically managing, minimizing, and moving on before anyone notices you were struggling in the first place. Here's what nobody told your parents and what psychology has only recently started saying out loud. Children who learn to suppress instead of express don't grow out of it. They parent from it. Stay until the end of this video because what you're about to hear is going to reframe everything you thought you already made peace with. Close your eyes and go back, not to a specific memory, just to the feeling of the house. Whether it felt like a place where you could fall apart or a place where falling apart was quietly, firmly, not allowed. In most 1970s homes, there was no language for what you were feeling. Nobody sat across from you and said, "Tell me what's going on inside." You came home from school, dropped your bag, and disappeared. Your parents were physically present, but emotionally somewhere else entirely. Tired, distracted, dealing with their own unprocessed weight that nobody had ever helped them carry either. This wasn't neglect in the way people talk about it now. This was the standard. This was what parenting looked like across an entire decade, because nobody had told parents yet that children needed more than survival, that they needed someone to look at them and actually see them, not just manage them. But here's what's interesting. Psychology now has a word for what most 1970s children experienced: emotional neglect. Not the dramatic kind, where nothing obviously terrible happened, but something consistently necessary was missing. And the reason it matters is because that quiet absence didn't stay in the past. It followed you. It shaped you. And if you're a parent today, there's a real chance it's still speaking through you in ways you haven't fully named yet. Before you judge the way you were raised, you need to understand something about the people who raised you. Your parents weren't making a calculated decision to withhold warmth. They were parenting on autopilot, running a program installed in them long before you arrived. Their parents came from households where survival was the only metric, where men didn't speak about what they'd seen, where children were expected to be grateful, obedient, and invisible. You watched your father go quiet when things got hard. You watched your mother push through pain like it didn't exist. And your brain, because that's what children's brains do, took notes. It built a map of how adults handled difficulty, and that map became your default setting. This wasn't cruelty. This was transmission, the automatic unconscious passing of emotional patterns from one generation to the next, not through words or intention, but through behavior, tone, and daily example. Psychologists call this intergenerational emotional modeling, and research confirms it happens whether parents intend it or not. The silence your grandparents passed to your parents didn't stop there. It kept moving, and understanding that chain is the first thing that gives you the power to break it. Every 1970s household had rules that were never written down and never spoken, but every child knew them perfectly. You knew not to cry at the dinner table. You knew certain questions made the room uncomfortable. You knew that needing too much attention, too much comfort, too much emotional response made you a problem. So you stopped needing, or more accurately, you learned to need privately, quietly, where it wouldn't inconvenience anyone. You feel upset, you go quiet, you feel scared, you act fine, you feel overwhelmed, you push harder. That was the operating system. It worked, it kept the peace, it made you functional and easy to manage, but functioning and thriving are two completely different things, and in the 1970s, nobody was making that distinction. Psychologists identify this as emotional suppression training, not a formal curriculum, but an environment so consistently unreceptive to emotional expression that children learn suppression as a survival strategy. And here's the part that matters for you as a parent today. Suppression doesn't disappear when you grow up. It goes underground. Your kid melts down and something in you tightens. Your teenager slams a door and instead of curiosity, you feel irritation. Not because you don't love them, because your nervous system was trained decades ago to treat emotional intensity as a threat to be managed, not a signal to be understood. This wasn't weakness. This was adaptation. But adaptation that served you at 7 years old can become the very thing that disconnects you from your child at 45. You fell off your bike, you scraped your knee, you came inside crying, and before you could get the words out, someone said, "Toughen up, walk it off, you're fine." And you swallowed it. The tears, the fear, the need for comfort, all of it went back down. And you went back outside, tough, fine, completely fine. That happened once, then 10 times, then 100 times. And each time, your brain updated its model. Emotional pain is not responded to. Emotional pain must be handled alone. Emotional pain is not an acceptable reason to stop functioning. Neuroscience now shows that repeated experiences of emotional non-response in childhood literally shape the developing brain's stress response system. Children who grow up without consistent emotional attunement develop higher baseline stress levels. Their bodies stay in low-grade alert even when there's no actual threat present. They become adults who are always slightly braced, always slightly ready for things to go wrong, always slightly disconnected from the present moment because their nervous system is still scanning for danger the way it learned to in a house where comfort wasn't guaranteed. This wasn't toughness training. This was stress system conditioning. And the difference matters because toughness is a choice, but a conditioned nervous system is something you have to consciously recognize before you can change it. The day your first child was born, you made a decision. Maybe you said it out loud. Maybe you just felt it. My kids are going to know they're loved. My kids are going to have what I didn't. And you meant it. You still mean it. But good intentions and new behavior patterns are two completely different things. And the gap between them is where most parents quietly struggle. Because the tools you use when you're tired, triggered, overwhelmed, those don't come from your intentions. They come from your history. You lose patience and you hear your father's voice come out of your mouth. You feel uncomfortable with your child's tears, and you feel your mother's instinct to say, "You're fine," before you've even assessed whether they are. You want to be warm and present and emotionally available, and then life gets hard, and the old defaults kick in like muscle memory. This isn't failure. This is how brains work. The mind defaults to its earliest and most practiced patterns under stress. What you learned at home in the 1970s is stored in the deepest, most automatic parts of your operating system. Changing it isn't about wanting to badly enough. It's about seeing it clearly enough, recognizing the pattern in real time, naming it, and choosing something different in that specific moment. Not perfectly, not always, but consistently enough that your child builds a different internal map than the one you were given. Breaking the cycle doesn't look like becoming a completely different person. It doesn't look like perfect emotional availability or never losing your patience or having a therapist-approved response to every tantrum. It looks like small, specific, repeated moments of doing something differently than your parents did. It looks like pausing before you say, "You're fine," and asking, "What happened?" instead. It looks like letting your child be upset without immediately trying to fix or shut down the feeling. It looks like saying, "I was wrong about that," when you were, because your parents almost certainly never said it, and your children need to hear it. It looks like noticing when you go cold and distant under stress and choosing even once to say, "I'm having a hard day," instead of disappearing behind a closed door. None of this requires a perfect childhood behind you. None of this requires you to have fully processed everything your parents passed down. It just requires willingness to be slightly more present than the generation before you managed to be, slightly more willing to name the feeling in the room, slightly more willing to let your child see you as a human being who struggles, recovers, and keeps trying. That's not weakness. That's the most powerful modeling you will ever do. Right now, today, you are parenting with one hand reaching forward toward who you want to be and one hand still attached to everything you were handed. That's not a flaw. That's what every generation does. The difference is whether you look at what's in that hand or pretend it isn't there. You are not your parents. You are not destined to repeat what was done. You are not broken because certain emotional patterns come automatically. You are someone who was raised without the tools and is building them anyway. You are someone who absorbed silence and chose to speak. You are someone who was handed a pattern and decided to examine it instead of just passing it on. Here is the principle that matters. The most powerful thing you can give your child is not a perfect parent. It is a parent who is honest about being imperfect and trying anyway. That honesty, that willingness to be seen, is the exact thing most 1970s parents could never offer you. And every time you offer it to your child, you are not just raising them differently. You are healing something that has been waiting a long time to be acknowledged. You are not the end of a broken line. You are the beginning of a different one. And that starts not with a grand gesture, it starts with the next conversation, in the next moment, when your child needs to feel like what they're feeling actually matters to someone. Be that someone because you already know what it felt like when no one was.